Hello everyone and welcome to today's video, which we're going to be looking at the 5 buy-to-let problems that nobody ever seems to talk about when you're looking to grow and build a property portfolio, and things to consider. So the first, which is so important, is cash flow and budgeting. And this is something that if you have run a business before or you've had any other form of active asset before, you're probably aware that cash flow and budgeting is very important. But as a buy-to-let landlord, it's very often missed, as in it's not talked about when you're speaking to agents, or whether that's estate agents or letting agents, or if you're working with a property sourcer. They may give you some initial headline figures on the property. What happens next? What happens when you purchase the property? Have you considered what the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and even a couple of years look like in terms of what funds you might need available? There's a rainy day fund, there's a sink fund, for example, for maintenance, and what your cash flow in and out of that property kind of looks like. So when your rent comes in, when your costs kind of go out, and all of the things that kind of covers that. You really do need to consider buy-to-let and any individual property or portfolio as a whole as a business, so you can fundamentally cash flow it and budget correctly when times are coming up. So the second is self-managing. And this is often something that's talked about very often by investors, landlords. You'll see it on property groups and forums as a way for people to increase their rental profits on a particular property. The problem with self-managing though is that it requires a lot of experience. It's very hands-on, it's very operationally intensive. And the scale that you get from working with a letting agent often outweighs the benefits of needing to kind of self-manage it. It's often much more favorable to use a letting agent, and the cost and the money that you spend, whether that's 10%, 12%, 15%, is usually money well spent, because it's not just about the day-to-day management. It's not about just the tenant find or the setting up of the tenancy, and then it's all plain sailing from there. You will have regular communication, regular conversations with the tenant that needs to be had on a regular basis with the property. That could be anything from making rent payments through to managing maybe even utilities, if there's a transfer over of a new tenant kind of coming in and an old tenant leaving, all the way through to ongoing maintenance of a particular property, and making sure that your property is maintained and looked after, and making sure that your kind of tenants are happy in that home. That all takes time. It all takes people's resources to operationally kind of manage that. And we'd usually recommend using a letting agent to do that, because the cost, as we said, of spending that money on a letting agent is usually money well spent. And also they have lots of specialists and lots of expertise, not just within the local area and not just within kind of managing particular kind of tenants and tenant profiles, but also the nuances of what's required as a landlord. The legal requirements of renting a property is increasing year on year. And it's very important you're abreast of that. And to do that as a smaller landlord, where you might only have 1 or 2 properties, or even a small portfolio of a number of properties, that can be very time intensive. And usually it's more beneficial to use a letting agent. The third problem that we see can happen easily in buy-to-let, that's often not talked about, which is similar to the first in terms of cash flow and budgeting, is bookkeeping. Keeping simple books on your properties, outgoing receipts, costs of running that property, so that when the time comes and you do your tax returns year on year, that you have everything in the right place. It's not spread across multiple bank accounts. It's not spread across multiple different shoeboxes in terms of receipts and things like that. There's so many tools now that you can do things online, on the cloud, that make it very simple to manage your bookkeeping, and then it's not a challenge every single year to try and get things in terms of deadline. I'd still recommend as well using an accountant, because they will allow you to kind of free up your time to spend it on more high value tasks. But also they're going to be much more skilled in understanding kind of, again, the nuances of what is required with buy-to-let in terms of taxation, but also where you could maybe make savings in terms of the runnings of your business and how you operate your business most efficiently. So bookkeeping isn't something you can just kind of pick up once a year. And well, you can, but I think it would be less impressive as an outcome for you. It's well worth using accountants. It's well worth keeping abreast on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, and a yearly basis as to where everything's at. And then you'll be much more up to speed with how profitable and how professional you can run your buy-to-let portfolio. The fourth key thing that I'd say to consider when it comes to running a buy-to-let portfolio, or even one property successfully, is communication. And this is massive, but it's so often overlooked. Just simple communication with your letting agent, with your refurbishment team, with your mortgage broker or solicitors or accountants, all the key team members that make up your running of your business, so that you don't have to be day-to-day involved in the operations and spread across multiple different facets and niches and key expertise areas of the business. To do that successfully, successfully, communication needs to be a two-way thing. It's not good enough to just wait for responses, let's say, and then act reactively to those. You do need to be proactive. Everything from your management through to your maintenance. Make sure that you have regular dialogue with your letting agents. Make sure you have regular dialogue with your maintenance team. Be proactive about what maintenance needs to be done on a property. Don't wait for a tenant, for example, to highlight potential issues. Make sure you're doing regular inspections. Make sure you're checking key things around the property. And it doesn't need to be done daily or weekly or monthly, but make sure you do check things like the gutters, the roof, making sure you do an internal inspection to see if it needs regular kind of maintenance on a particular area, or making sure there aren't key issues that are kind of being missed. Damp is a common one, especially when you're talking about kind of some of the UK housing stock with things like terrace houses, where you might have a property that's been tenanted for a while even, and the tenant just doesn't mention anything, they put up with it, but maybe there's an ongoing problem that needs resolving, and it could be very easy to be fixed if you spot it early enough. But after many months and sometimes even years of a problem going on, it can be more costly and more problematic for a whole host of reasons. And that's only solved when you have regular communication, regular processes and systems in place, so you can spot problems early and you can make sure that you can run that portfolio correctly. And the last thing I would say to consider when it comes to a buy-to-let portfolio, or even one buy-to-let property, is when you should consider diversifying. And the reason why I highlight there's a potential problem with buy-to-lets is because very often it's either not talked about at all, and then people don't really have a plan on what they're going to do with their buy-to-let portfolio, how they're going to go from one property to two, two to three, three to five, five to 10, for example. But then also it can sometimes be talked about too much. So when you're diversifying your properties, you have too many stages in that process. So you have different locations, you're maybe looking at different property types, you're looking at different tenant types you're looking at, and you go too wide on your diversity. You're not thinking too narrow in terms of what areas you want to focus on, and that can sometimes be a problem as well. You want to make sure that you have efficiencies, you want to make sure that you do have some diversity, but trying to buy 10 properties that are all in different areas, all different letting agents, all different refurbishment teams can bring its own problems. So diversity is important, but it's also important to have a plan and understand where you're going from that first to the second to the next property. So I hope that helps. There's a bit of a roundup as different buy-to-let problems to maybe consider. Now, buy-to-let is a fantastic property strategy. It's the mainstream, it's the vanilla approach to UK residential property. It's the cornerstone of my own portfolio and many investors that I speak to as well. And it can be a great approach. It's just important to consider maybe some of the downsides, which there are in any asset and any business, but also consider some of the ways that you can maybe mitigate against those. So by understanding the problems, understanding the things that aren't necessarily talked about or considered when it comes to growing a buy-to-let portfolio, puts you one step ahead and puts you in a nice position going forward. Hope that helps. Any questions, please feel free to ask, and look forward to catching up with you in the next video. All the best.